Good evening, generals. Welcome to the series of unsung heroes. It starts with the engine idols. 1,100 hours of siege, 15 days of bombing, 3,700 men, now reduced to barely 2,700, and one woman. Susan Travers sat behind the wheel of General Koenig's Ford staff car, the desert night pressing against the windshield like black water. Around her, the remnants of the first Free French Brigade prepared for what military theorists would politely call a tactical withdrawal, and what everyone else understood as a suicide run. The math was simple. To reach British lines, they had to drive through 3 rings of German and Italian forces. They had to navigate minefields in complete darkness, and they had to do it at speed, because the moment they were discovered, every gun in Rommel's Afrika Korps would open fire. Koenig turned to her. "We have to get in front. If we go, the rest will follow." She was 32 years old, the daughter of a British admiral. She'd spent her 20s playing tennis at country clubs and gambling in Monte Carlo. She had no military training. She joined the war because she was bored, and now she was about to lead 2,000 men through a minefield. Later, she would describe the feeling as delightful, going as fast as you can in the dark. Her only concern, that the engine would stall. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The question isn't how she survived that night. The question is, how does someone like Susan Travers end up in a position where survival means driving full speed through a minefield toward enemy machine guns? The answer involves a toxic family, a forbidden love affair, and a psychological profile that made her uniquely suited for a role that shouldn't have existed. The only woman in the French Foreign Legion. This is her story. Let's be clear about something from the start. Susan Travers wasn't running toward anything. She was running away. Born September 23, 1909 in Kensington, London, to Admiral Francis Eaton Travers and heiress Eleanor Catherine Turnbull, Susan grew up in what should have been privilege but was actually prison. Her father married for money. Her mother resented the arrangement. The house was cold. Not metaphorically, though it was that too, but literally cold. British propriety at its most suffocating. When asked about her childhood, Travers would say she was happier the further she was away from her parents. So she left. First opportunity. She made money as a semi-professional tennis player, funded by a doting aunt who recognized something in Susan that her parents couldn't see, a woman who would rather die than be bored. The 1930s found her exactly where you'd expect. The French Riviera, Monte Carlo, parties that lasted until dawn, a string of lovers who wouldn't commit. She spoke fluent French. She drove fast cars. She lived the life her mother's money could buy and her father's title could access. But there was a problem. It wasn't enough. Here's what people miss about Susan Travers. She wasn't brave in the conventional sense. She wasn't motivated by patriotism or ideology or some grand moral vision. She was motivated by something far more dangerous. She was pathologically allergic to being told what to do. Upper-class British women in 1939 had exactly 2 acceptable life paths: marry well or marry adequately. Susan was 30 years old, unmarried, childless. By the standards of her social circle, she was a failure, and then Hitler invaded Poland. When World War II broke out, Susan Travers joined the French Red Cross as a nurse. This should have been perfect, respectable war work, socially acceptable. She lasted approximately 48 hours. Having lived a pampered life, Susan had no stomach for sickness or blood. The gore made her physically ill. The suffering was unbearable. She was a disaster as a nurse, but she could drive. She joined the French Expeditionary Force as an ambulance driver in November 1939. This was better. This was speed and motion and danger at a distance. Still helping, still respectable, but without the blood. Her first deployment, Finland, Winter War, Russians invading. The French sent a force to help, and Susan went with them until April 1940, when Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Then France fell. This is the moment. This is where most people would have gone home, back to Britain, back to safety. The war in France was over. The smart move was to evacuate, go to London, maybe get a job at the War Office shuffling papers. Susan Travers went to London, saw General Charles de Gaulle calling for free French volunteers, and immediately joined up. Not because she hated fascism, though she did. Not because she loved France, though she did. But because the alternative was going back to her parents' house in Kensington and being a good British girl. She would rather face Rommel. In September 1940, she became an ambulance driver for the 13th Demi-Brigade of the French Foreign Legion. The Legion, that legendary collection of criminals, refugees, and men with pasts they couldn't discuss, and one British socialite who lied about her stomach for blood. Her comrades nicknamed her La Miss, a term that was both affectionate and slightly mocking. She was the only woman among thousands of men. She should have been a novelty, a mascot. Instead, something unexpected happened. She was good at this, really good. She navigated minefields. She drove through rocket attacks. She demonstrated such nerve under fire that senior officers started requesting her specifically. By 1941, she wasn't just an ambulance driver anymore. She was assigned as the personal driver for General Marie-Pierre Kœnig, commander of the 1st Free French Brigade. This is where the story gets complicated. Marie-Pierre Kœnig was married. This is important. He wasn't some bachelor officer. He had a wife back in France, a family. Susan Travers became his lover. The timeline isn't clear. These things never are. But by the time the 1st Free French Brigade deployed to Libya, everyone knew. The general and his driver. It wasn't exactly subtle when you're the only woman in a brigade of 3,000 men. But here's what makes this more than just a wartime romance. Koenig was legitimately brilliant, a tactical genius. One of the few French generals who'd opposed the armistice and joined de Gaulle immediately. A true believer. And Susan was still running, still escaping, still proving to herself and everyone else that she wasn't going to be confined by anyone's expectations. The relationship gave her something, proximity to power, a sense of importance. She wasn't just a driver anymore. She was the driver, the one the general trusted, the one who knew the plans before anyone else. But it also trapped her, because now she couldn't leave, couldn't transfer, couldn't walk away. She was in love with a married man in the middle of a desert war, and the only way forward was deeper into the fire. In February 1942, Koenig's brigade was posted to Bir Hakeim, a dried-up well in the Libyan desert, 45 miles from the coast, southwest of Tobruk. It was the southern anchor of the British 8th Army's Gazala line, an old Turkish fort. No natural defenses, just sand, some barbed wire, and whatever the French could dig. Koenig's force had 3 months to prepare. They dug trenches, laid minefields, built bunkers, camouflaged everything, and they waited, because everyone knew Rommel was coming. May 26, 1942. Rommel's plan was elegant. Feint north, sweep south around Bir Hakeim with his panzer divisions, encircle the entire British line. The Italian Ariete division was supposed to take Bir Hakeim in 15 minutes. They failed. In 1 hour, Koenig's forces drove back the Italians, taking 91 prisoners and destroying 32 tanks. Rommel was furious. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. This was supposed to be a speed bump. But now his southern flank was exposed, and these free French troops, these exiles, these rejects from a defeated nation, were holding. So he did what Rommel did best. He called in the Luftwaffe. For the next 2 weeks, German and Italian forces pounded Bir Hakeim with hundreds of bombing runs, artillery barrages, and infantry assaults. The French held. Think about what this means. 3,700 men against elements of 4 Axis divisions. No armor, limited ammunition, temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, and Susan Travers was there for all of it. When Koenig ordered all women to evacuate, she refused. This wasn't bravery in the Hollywood sense. This was obsession. She couldn't leave Koenig. Wouldn't leave. Even when it became obvious that Bir Hakeim was going to fall, she became the only woman among at least 3,500 men under siege. The bombers came in waves, Stukas, Heinkels. The sound alone was enough to drive men mad. The explosions turned the fort into a moonscape. Dust everywhere, bodies everywhere, the smell of cordite and blood and fear, and still they held. On June 1st, Italian officers approached under a white flag and asked for surrender. Koenig politely refused. Day 8, Day 9, Day 10. The attacks intensified. Rommel himself came to direct operations. June 8th, 9th, 10th, the Luftwaffe and artillery reached their peak intensity. Food gone, water running low, ammunition nearly exhausted. The position was no longer tenable. British forces to the north were collapsing. The Germans had broken through. Bir Hakeim was now completely isolated, surrounded. A pocket of resistance that served no strategic purpose except to die slowly. On June 10th, Koenig made the decision. They would break out that night. Here's what they faced. 3 rings of Axis forces, German machine gun nests, Italian artillery, and minefields. Their own minefields that they'd laid months earlier, plus German minefields laid during the siege. French sappers cleared a narrow gap, 200 yards wide. That was it. That was the escape route. The plan: move at 20-30 hours under cover of darkness. Drive northwest toward British lines, 25 miles through enemy territory. And who would lead? Susan Travers, in Koenig's Ford staff car. Because, as Koenig said, we have to get in front. If we go, the rest will follow. 20-30 hours. 8:30 p.m. They left over an hour late, 21:30. Because organization in chaos is impossible. At first they tried to maintain formation, columns of vehicles, infantry interspersed, some kind of military order. Then someone hit a mine. The explosion lit up the desert. Tracer fire immediately followed. The Germans had spotted them. This is the moment. Susan Travers could have stopped, could have turned around, could have surrendered. Instead, she floored it. Her later words: "It is a delightful feeling, going as fast as you can in the dark. My main concern was that the engine would stall. Delightful." She called it delightful. The Ford roared through the minefield. Behind her, the entire French column followed. The formation broke apart. Small groups, individual vehicles, hand-to-hand combat with German patrols, machine gun fire, tank shells. The night exploded into noise and light and smoke. Susan kept driving. Mines to the left, mines to the right. Germans firing from concealed positions. The car jolting over rough terrain. Koenig beside her, issuing orders by radio. Staff officers in the back, holding on. She didn't slow down. At 10:30 a.m. on June 11th, the column entered British lines. Susan's car had 11 bullet holes. The shock absorber was destroyed. The brakes were unserviceable, but she'd made it. Of the original 3,700 men, approximately 2,700 escaped, including 200 walking wounded. The military historians would later call it one of the great breakouts of World War II. The French propaganda machine would turn it into legend. De Gaulle would use it to prove that Free France was a legitimate fighting force. But for Susan Travers, the immediate aftermath was far less glorious. Koenig was promoted to general and left the North African theater for higher command, and a reunion with his wife. There it is. The truth that doesn't make it into the heroic narratives. They stopped seeing each other. The affair was over. Koenig went back to his family. Susan stayed with the Legion. She continued as a driver, this time for a self-propelled anti-tank gun. Not glamorous, not at Koenig's side, just another soldier in a foreign army. She served in the Italian campaign, in France, in Germany. At some point, Koenig decided to drive himself and went over a mine. Susan was wounded in the explosion. Even this detail is telling. Koenig driving, not her. He didn't need her anymore, didn't trust her the same way. The relationship had shifted. Here's what's remarkable. She didn't quit. Most people, after being dumped by the general they'd risked everything for, would have found a way out, requested transfer, taken a desk job, gone back to Britain. In May 1945, Susan formally applied to join the French Foreign Legion. She failed to mention her gender on the application. They accepted her. This made her the first and only woman to ever join the French Foreign Legion. Think about this decision. The war in Europe was over. She could have gone home, could have written her memoirs, could have leveraged her fame, and she was famous by then. the woman who'd driven through the minefields, into a comfortable post-war life. Instead, she stayed with the Legion. She was sent to Vietnam during the First Indochina War. More combat, more years in uniform. Why? Here's the uncomfortable truth about Susan Travers. She was happiest when she was running, from her parents, from social expectations, from the life she was supposed to live, even from Koenig, eventually. The Foreign Legion offered something that peacetime Britain never could: anonymity within structure. She could be a soldier, one among many. No questions about her past, no judgment about her gender or her affairs or her choices. The Legion didn't care that she was a woman. They cared that she could drive through a minefield without flinching. She eventually married Nicholas Schlegelmilch, a legionnaire who had fought at Bir Hakeim with the 13th Demi-Brigade. They had 2 sons. But even this feels like settling into the role she'd created for herself: the soldier, the legionnaire, the woman who'd chosen a life that no other woman had chosen. She received the Médaille Militaire, France's highest military honor, the Légion d'honneur, and the Croix de Guerre. In 1956, Koenig pinned the Médaille Militaire on her chest. All he said was, "Well done, La Miss." That was that. No grand reunion, no acknowledgement of what they'd been to each other. Just well done, and move along. Because that's what soldiers do. They move along. Susan Travers waited for Koenig and her husband to die before publishing her memoirs in 2000. She was 91 years old. She told the author that everyone was gone, and she was left alone with her medals. One of her motivations to write the book was for her grandchildren to know how she had been. The title, Tomorrow to be Brave. Not I Was Brave or The Brave Life. Tomorrow to be brave. Always tomorrow. Always the next day. Always the next deployment. Susan Travers died on December 18, 2003, at age 94. Today, Paris commemorates the Battle of Bir Hakeim with a metro station and bridge bearing its name. Millions of tourists pass through each year on their way to the Eiffel Tower, probably never knowing what that name represents. A dried-up well in Libya, 15 days under siege, a midnight breakout through minefields, and one woman who called it delightful. So what's the lesson here? Susan Travers wasn't a saint. She wasn't motivated by pure ideals. She had an affair with a married man. She lied on her Legion application. She spent decades running from a life she didn't want. But she also did something that no other woman in history has done. She became a member of the French Foreign Legion. She drove through a minefield at full speed while leading 2,000 men to safety. She earned France's highest military honors through action, not politics. The traditional narrative would make her a feminist icon, a trailblazer, a woman who shattered barriers. But the truth is more complex. Susan Travers didn't set out to shatter barriers. She set out to escape from boredom, from expectations, from a gilded cage in Kensington. She found her purpose not in ideology but in motion, in speed, in the delightful feeling of going as fast as you can in the dark. Your only concern that the engine might stall. Most people spend their lives trying to find safety. Susan Travers spent hers driving away from it. That, perhaps, is the real story of La Miss. That's all for now. Good night.